and welcome to the Ultradilute podcast featuring honest conversations with driven creative people about nurturing health and building creativity in a world that tends to promote imbalance. I'm Roddy Schrock, an arts organizer turned practicing classically trained homeopath. After years building communities in art and technology, I shifted my focus to the health of the people who build our shared culture. From entrepreneurs to artists, designers to parents. I help people regain health naturally through homeopathy. And if that should resonate with you, you can learn more and even book a free discovery call at ultradilute.com. So on to today's episode. I first met composer and performance artist Colin through his work in the world of experimental music and performance, where voice, bodies, and computers braid into social spaces that are both fragile and fiercely alive. In this conversation, we talk about what health can mean when you're a driven, creative person, whose mind runs hot and whose body pays the price. Colin has been reorienting his practice toward attunement, an everyday skill of noticing relationships between the self, others, and the environment, and adjusting the inputs that shape our energy and attention. And along the way, we also talk about scale and setting. After large commissions in large institutions, Colin found that smaller rooms often hold bigger truths. Spaces where a choir warm-up, a shared breath, or a hand-built puppet do more than a spectacle ever could. We explore how tech burnout led him toward physical craft and building trades, and why that grounded, embodied work can be a counterweight to today's tendency towards accelerationism. This interview is part of my ongoing series on creative health, practical conversations at the intersection of art, attention, and care. Colin, thanks for being here. And for those of you who don't know, Colin composes music, performance, and environments that expand consciousness and trouble binaries, as well as boundaries of perception and communication. They work with communities across disciplines and use immaterial and material means, including voices, bodies, and computers, to interface and reimagine worlds. Self currently lives between Berlin and New York. And Colin, I think I'm catching you today in Portland. We were just chatting before I hit record, and it's just so lovely to catch up and just see where things are at and to hear about some of your plans. And do you want to share a little bit about what brings you to Portland at this time?
The beginning of a general contracting journey. So I'm doing an apprenticeship here, actually with my dad, who is a engineer and has been building, I think, for over 30 years or more. See, if I'm 37, it's definitely more than 30 years. And I'm, yeah, learning everything from how to replace fence posts to installing outlets and learning about the fundamentals of electrical and plumbing and building A-frames and HVAC, pouring concrete. So I have another friend who's out here in Hood River, Oregon, who I will be helping to assist his building project next year. So, in the sort of prospect of doing that eventually myself, I have long-term visions of having an all queer and trans general contracting company and becoming a educator of all of these different building practices that I can hopefully pass on to others during times of change. And yeah.
I love it. I just think that's just amazing. And before I hit record, you were sharing a little bit about just like what you saw as, what it's like to kind of work in communities that maybe are a little bit outside of what we consider the art world or the performance world, and some of the bridge building there. But I mean, my partner and I, we moved to rural Massachusetts a couple of years ago, and so we're kind of out in the woods, um, and I have to say, I have, and how to say this without just sounding like a total, whatever, but like, it has been so rewarding to just get to know people that are a little bit outside of my comfort zone, just to be perfectly, honest about it. And and to just like spend time and kind of hear from people that I just wouldn't, have had access to in my prior kind of career and kind of geopolitical social situation. And I just want more of that, honestly. And I think that's like so good, to be able to just connect with people that, and I'll just be perfectly honest, that maybe at other points in my life I wouldn't have felt as open to even interfacing with per se. And uh, it's been great.
It reminds me, I just was at this thing that happens outside of Pittsburgh called Honcho Campout, and it's a sort of like queer camping um festival, and there's music and conversations, and there was one specifically that really felt like this so much of the center of uh, the camp out was this conversation that happened between these people, Viva Ruiz and Neon Christina, friends from my New York community, where they both were kind of sharing stories of a somewhat like self-imposed bias about how they were essentially afraid of the out of like rural communities or non sanctuary places as like, oh, if I go there, I'm immediately going to be attacked or I'm immediately going to be like in danger. And then upon actually going to these places, being like, oh, there's my own internalized, classism or racism
Mm-hmm.
or anti-blackness or, all these different things about
Mm-hmm.
where people think that they're going to be welcomed and safe and actually like you're not so often in imminent danger in these places in the way that we like have those, of course, those scary moments where in rural communities you'll see like the truck drive by with the like white nationalist flags and stuff like
Right.
that, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm really out here.
Yeah.
But then there's also people out there. I think there's a growing there is a sea change and a
Mm-hmm.
migration in the form of people for many different reasons needing to sort of spend time and also transform their relationship to these more rural parts of where we live. And
Totally, totally. And I think it's a two-way street. And I think, people that are maybe in some of these more isolated areas, because they don't have conversations with people that maybe are from different areas or from different backgrounds or queer and trans communities, maybe as often. As soon as they have a few of those conversations, it creates so much. I think it creates such a sea change, even for the local community, to then be more open to that. And it just, I don't know, I think it just grows exponentially. And just, anyway, um yeah.
in the in Appalachians where they recently had these floods, there was this
Mm-hmm.
article about how all of a sudden on the ground you had these like queer anarcho punks and then these like church moms and all these different and then like the like dudes with their chainsaws like all working together being like, okay, you're gonna babysit the kids while we go get safe water,
Mm-hmm.
and then these people are gonna help clear the things so that your friend can help drive this truck down through this place so that we're all gonna be okay. And
Yeah.
we know this from like Rebecca Solnit and other authors and who help us understand too that like in times of disaster, people don't turn on one another and kill each other. They usually are pushed into a place of humanity, which I
Yeah.
feel like is so integral to this bigger thing that, yeah, a bigger imagination about what that could be like or what it, can turn into.
Yeah,
Um,
I hear you. And I mean, I think that's just, it's so beautiful to hear that that's an area that you're I was going to say exploring, but actually really moving forward in. And I guess that sort of brings me to something that I wanted to ask you, which is like, how what field or fields would you sort of place your work in? I mean, we were talking a little earlier. You mentioned that this feels like a continuation of your art practice, and um, I would just love to hear more about kind of where, and not that it's even important where one situates oneself sometimes, but I think it is interesting to hear how people see themselves in terms of fields they may be coming from or moving towards or uniting or bridging.
When you first sent this invitation for, and we're like, oh, this is about health. I was like, what does my work have to do with health? I was like, health? Is that really part of what I do? And then I was like, wait a minute. I was like, all of these different things that I do are about like taking care of and fostering communities, even in a
Yeah,
temporary assembly.
yeah,
And, from like this group singing choir practice that I have been doing now for like 13
yeah.
years. But then I was also thinking about like How to Survive Winter in New York, a kind of like publicly authored resource distribution of like information and then things like I was like, oh right, I had this like meditation group on Telegram during the pandemic lockdown and like I was like, oh right, so like there seems to be something I think throughout my practice as an artist that has to do with yeah, bringing people together to help transform maybe their perception of what is possible or how yeah, I think there's something about um changing helping people transform through a shared experience what they think is possible or what they're capable of doing. So, that can look so many different ways, but so often it revolves around the making of performance or or sound or using the voice. Um, but yeah, or creating these so much of it is also about the temporary assembly, this idea that you can get together with a group of people. Sometimes it is your community, sometimes it's strangers, and that you can be changed by bearing witness to your collective power and also your role within your agency that you have within a group to maybe yeah be an agent of change yourself and hopefully inspire people to like realize that this isn't just a call and self thing. This is like anyone can kind of be in that position.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Well, I remember when you organized the temporary community kind of group singing project uh, during the Heather Dewey Hagborg and Chelsea Manning exhibit that I curated at Friedman Gallery a couple of, well, not a couple of years, maybe, closer to a decade now, actually, now that I stop and think about it. Something,
It's 2 years ago,
I
right?
know, God, that's amazing that was so long ago, but it's hard for me anyhow at this point to kind of articulate the alignment with that project with how we might commonly understand health, but I do very much intuitively and sort of I think abstractly see how your work does align with so many of the ways that kind of you're alluding to health being defined. And I wonder, I mean, do you have kind of a working definition of health, for yourself, or I think it's such an individualized thing, and I'm always curious to just ask, particularly artists, what health means to them.
For our conversation and ask myself, what does the word health mean to me, or like what is the interpretation I have of it outside of the sort of like I guess pre-composed world or the prescriptive uh common understanding of what that word means. And I was able to sort of like think about this in terms of something that exists. It's almost yeah, that's something that exists between in and through relationships.
Mm.
Um, our relationships to ourselves, but then also our relationships to others in the world. So there's something for me about perception and uh, awareness that we move through these fields of consciousness, whether it's like somatic awareness or consciousness around what's happening around you and to the people and the environment with that you are inside of. So, yeah, there's also this thing too about consciousness practice
Mm-hmm.
where I think health for me so much has to do, um, I don't want to say like it's a frequency, but it does feel like it sort of is something you attune to, or it's something that like you can with your mind kind of be present and your body really be present to it. Um, I don't know. I have a very funny relationship to like I to time. Like I will talk to time because I think time is a sentient part of the universe, and I feel the same way about like health or something. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it feels as though it's something that you can attune to or like move it towards. It's
Mm-hmm.
like that's like a maybe very woo-woo way of saying it, but I
Oh no,
think
yeah.
on a fundamental level, there's something about this thing of relationships, and um, yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
It totally does. And I'm actually really trying to kind of stop for myself anyway, moving into homeopathy. I'm there are so many things that kind of get put under the woo woo category that it's just all it really means in many cases I think is like it has something to do with something that's immaterial or intangible or and there's so much of the world that we just don't know and to and to at least be open to the possibilities of attuning ourselves to these other forces or dimensions or however one might want to think of it, I think is, completely, to me, it seems like a very rational thing to at least be curious about and to want to, discover. So, um,
I think about like a really simple way of kind of demonstrating what you're saying too is like something like a meditation or prayer or a practice that has to do with yeah, being with consciousness,
mm,
with or without a spiritual practice attached to it,
mm-hmm,
or with or without a religious practice, is a really good example of that. You're like,
yeah,
there are tangible things that you can notice when you that are different about those things, but um, yeah, it gets. I mean, I've spent so much time in the last few years also learning about yeah, all of these different things that the contemporary world deems woo woo because it's also like from a place that would challenge the paradigms or dynamics of how we like yeah, how the medical industry or certain industries are able to operate.
yeah,
I think we know this as Americans. It's like if you live within the American healthcare system and you see the way in which it's built to break people and keep people sick
mm-hmm,
um, and yeah, you over time are like, oh right, this is why there's people who have who have to move away from that.
mm-hmm,
But then you do get into the scary territory. There's always people who are, I think we're just unfortunately in this time too of the like extreme, like I was trying to put words to this. I was like the anti-vaxxers who have kind of appropriated woo-woo in the sense like
uh-huh.
there's that clip of the woman where she's like, Lyme's disease is a gift from another dimension.
Oh
And
my
it's like,
God.
no.
That's,
And and
oh
then
my
they call
God.
themselves they're like, oh, we're countercultural. It's like, no, girl, you're
Yeah.
not counter. This is not counterculture. This is
It's just crazy. You're
this
just
is crazy.
crazy,
Yeah.
right?
There does have to be some kind of discernment
Yeah.
around these things in the world, yeah, on the periphery. And it's a shame that also those things it almost feels like manufactured opposition in the sense that like in trying to sort of devalue and um, create a stigma around something like homeopathic medicine or non-Western medicine are these sort of like viral pieces of media that just make it look like it's just all gobbledygook, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, yeah, I've it's been such a learning experience for me to kind of begin well, because I'm coming to homeopathy. I mean, it is a field, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that it is, a lot of people see it as, like placebo effect, or it's just this, that, and the other. It doesn't do anything. It's just water, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't. I mean, I'll be the first to say, like, I don't exactly know how it works. I think it's actually quite, there's still a lot of research, and there's a lot of research being done to try to explain it. But at the same time, I see its efficacy in, my own life, or others. And I also have learned more and more, like, it's, extraordinary history of usage, particularly in Europe, and to this day, like in Switzerland, it's covered by insurance, and it's seen as a, very mainstream kind of form of medicine. So it's so funny to kind of see these fields get put into kind of these political lanes or these social lanes, and I find that quite confusing. But at the same time, I just honestly just kind of just try to ignore it and just be like, hey, yeah,
All of this is, defense against psychic warfare, and you can't also like uh discount these things as being, yeah, they get weaponized against things that work, or
yeah,
actual systems or things that are viable solutions for health
yeah,
and wellness.
yeah,
Like,
totally.
but yeah, living in Berlin for the last decade, it's I have a wonderful God, if there's one good thing I can say about Germany, which I don't really love as a nation at the moment, but is that, I have an incredible GP who is half Chinese, half German, who really takes the sort of dualistic approach of
Mm-hmm.
Eastern and Western medicine. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of like, let's look at this from a homeopathic perspective, and what
Mm-hmm.
can we do fundamentally about like preventative medicine,
Right.
or taking the form of like daily practices. And if that doesn't work, what antibiotics do should we, or
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like, let's also like acknowledge
Totally.
the efficacy of other medical things. And having access to a GP like that is
Yeah.
so invaluable.
Oh
I think
man.
that had such a big impact on my life.
I hear you. And I mean, that's kind of my dream, is for for homeopathic medicine or traditional Chinese medicine, to just have it be like a form of treatment that can be in conjunction with more conventional treatment, or not, or, but just to have it just be available just seems like it would be so helpful. But anyway, I could keep going on. But
We could stay on this one for a
I know,
long time.
yes.
Between you and I,
Oh my
we
God.
got hours.
Oh, I know. That's it might have to be a two part series or something here. But I want to talk about you, and I want to talk about what you're doing, because I just, it's been such a joy following your career over the years, and to just see kind of the breadth of your practice in so many different areas. And you know, I guess I first got to know your work more from kind of a technological perspective. And I guess I just kind of wanted to hear, like, where do you feel like you're at in terms of like your relationship to technology in your practice, or, you've worked with people like Holly Herndon and so forth. And um, kind of do you feel like that's evolved over the years? And please take it where you want to. I'm not sure this is the most interesting question, but I guess I'm just kind of wondering where you're at in terms of the kind of material versus immaterial versus technological sort of, approach that you take to your work.
Things that I feel conscious and aware of the fact that when I was younger, um, the I think that the topic and presence of the concept of technology, so much was rooted in, actually using computers and being a part of a uh, like machine processing and information and all the tools that can come from computers. And something I think was something big kind of happened, I think, leading into um, like pandemic lockdown time where I guess because of what so many of us experienced as like computational burnout or just like the need to move away from screens,
Hmm.
um, I think got me. I want to say that that was one of the sort of impetuses for me to begin to think about like all the different technologies and um, methodologies that exist outside of like the screen world or screen land, and that has turned into uh I think I something that has both manifested as like performance and music and also a sort of like politic that is not about um not so deeply rooted in this idea of the necessity to become more advanced. Like I think we've a lot of us have seen the sort of negative effects of um like and also and yeah the so I'm like what do I want to say about my like feelings of needing to distance myself from like the technological side of the art world or like
Hmm.
what turned
Hmm.
into like an AI dominated corner of the
Yeah.
internet or something. And yeah, I there's like too much for me to say about personal rela my personal relationships with certain people in my life and about, the things that exist in those relationships.
Hmm.
This is like a tricky thing for me is like you know, navigating. Yeah, I think that I've be in the midst of the rise of AI and thinking about all of the different technologies and like what is the sort of like social political landscape of media politics
Yeah.
has really drawn me into physical practice
Yeah.
and asking myself about like what do we need to root ourselves in amidst a technocracy, a fascist technocracy that's also not going away, AI that's going to very soon be AGI, and the like ubiquitous inclusion of this thing in our day-to-day lives that is going to drastically, um, yeah, determine so much of our future. And how do we sort of set stakes in the physical material world
Yeah.
during a time and build things in a time when you have a ruling class that's very much interested in the total decimation of a physical reality and end times fascism
Hmm.
as the sort of like center root of um, leaving behind the physical world and our physical bodies. And I think when I was younger, I was such a I was so enamored by, you know, all of these different concepts and writers who made their practice about cyborgs and the sort of ways in which we were were implicated and born automatically into these technology systems as we're, even before we are born, when we're, and something has changed where I think we've reached the other side of not only seeing the sort of like uh, problem that my generation has created in terms of this like Silicon Valley promise, but then also seeing all of the fundamental ways in which that makes us all sick and the way that it makes us so broken. And so I think about in my own life the people who are, yeah, there's just I, on all sides of on every side of, I was gonna say both sides of the coin, but it's really more than a binary of a one and a two. But like seeing the ways in which all people are affected socially, politically, financially, by the class war that exists inside of technology
Mm-hmm.
politics today, and the conversations around AGI, and that when there's all of these people who are also, you know, I think about someone like Josh Citarella, who's creating this kind of like huge forum of all these people coming in to talk about the media landscape and having come from the art world, but there's just like these massive blind spots with so many of these conversations, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
listening to these people speak, and I'm like, have any of you ever like I don't know, there's so many things to say. Like I don't want to fully shit on Josh because I think he does some amazing things, but I'm just like, it almost feels to me when when I'm listening to something like Doom Scroll, I'm like, this feels like manufactured opposition in the sense that this is like created by the right as a what we're supposed to believe is the voice of the left or the
Mm-hmm.
centrist, like leaning like this is socially and politically where we're at as a left in the sort of like um yeah, so this is a very long answer, but
No, it's great. Yeah.
just to say I think that we're bearing witness to, yeah, also like a siloing of the conversation around all of these social and political things around health and
Yeah.
bodies and eugenics
Yeah.
um and it sucks. It's like it's just on a fundamental level, it's boring. It's like
Yeah.
you listen to these some of these conversations, you're like, I can't believe this is like that's
Yeah.
your imagination. That's all you can dream up
Right.
is that solution.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think I'm also in a funny situation right now where, so many people are like, why would you move to America? Or why would you live in America during a time of collapse? And it's like, I think that so many people are thinking about this time as being an ending, but or like there are so many endings happening, I guess, at all times right now, but there's also, a death is not an ending, it's a transformation. It's like it becomes something else. And we need people to sort of be present to dreaming forward different things to be possible.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, like if it's the same reason why I have Palestinian friends who like refuse to leave Berlin, Germany. They're like, no,
Mm-hmm.
they want us to leave, and it's hard to take that path, but I think it's important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you saying what you're saying because it's really refreshing to hear someone who has a history in creative technology and who understands to a larger degree than maybe some people do, kind of how people are thinking creatively about technology and so forth. All that is to say is, I'm right there with you. I mean, I read conversations about AI or I see headlines and so forth, and I'm always just struck by, I just feel like we're always having the wrong conversations about AI or technology, and it just like I don't feel like anyone's really grappling with, I think as you pointed out, so many of the class issues that feel so present around the way that technology is kind of being developed right now, and also just kind of the weird assumption that I feel like people have around technology that it's somehow neutral or that it doesn't have a bias or an agenda. And I think those are more the things that would be very healthy for us to talk about. Like my partner is a writer, and he won't even he will not even go to Chat GPT to just like experiment, quote unquote, because he's like, yeah,
He like, and so many people I know, they're like, absolutely, absolutely not.
yeah,
And you know, the jig is up when you create a public resource for people, and then immediately the people who use that resource are negatively affected by the technology.
yeah.
Um,
No
but yeah,
kidding.
there's no space for these types of conversations to happen inside those communities. And if and when I ever bring it up, it's immediately shut down. And they say, this is just how the world is. And then also, like, it's not as bad as you think it is. They're just like, it's the same, logic, unfortunately, that like is used to justify genocide or used to justify eugenics. And it's you you see the like, but what's also sad and scary to me too is I think like it's mostly like a class war thing that
Yeah.
I am bearing witness to is like if you um exist within a sort of realm of wealth, or also you identify with your wealth, or also those things, you you don't think about it. It becomes like the number one way in which you understand, and then it also comes back to this thing of like these critiques of AI or technology become a part of it's like they love to classify it as being woke, or they're like, oh, this is like you're getting identity politics. It's like, no, I'm actually literally just talking about like people in Mississippi being poisoned by like a mass, like these. And I might also like to just put this into my own life. My parents live here in Oregon and in a somewhat rural community, and they're trying to build a huge data
Oh,
processing
wow.
center here that which would
Yeah.
decimate the water access.
Yeah.
And I'm just ready for I'm like I'm like, why have people not in Berlin you have these people lighting Teslas on fire. I'm
Yeah.
like, why are people not lighting these plants on fire as like it's class warfare? And
Yeah.
then they do this thing, they're like, oh, we're gonna incarcerate you, or if you protest, or if you put and in any way like the property of this thing being built in danger. But I'm like, we're gonna see much crazier class warfare in the forms of more and more resources being siloed to support these generators and without any consent from a local population. And then yeah,
Hmm.
we can go down this road as deep as
Oh,
we want to. We know exactly where it leads. It's like,
yeah.
um
Yeah, I mean, but I'm really glad you're talking about that. I just feel like I don't talk to enough people who are addressing these issues. And, I mean, I come from the South near Memphis, Tennessee. And yeah, there's like a new data center that's going up and pushing Black communities out of neighborhoods that they've lived in for generations. And then it has the environmental damage that comes with it and so forth. And, I think the company that's building it is like giving a little money to a nonprofit nearby or something to somehow make everything okay. And it's all, it's just really gross. And I wish there was more outcry about these things, but I feel like so many times, as you said, like there's just an inevitability about it that just, or there's a kind of a manufactured sense of inevitability about it that just makes everyone feel like this is just what's happening. And yeah.
just sort of talk about these things in terms of my art practice, but
Yeah.
at the same
Yeah.
time, like we've watched, I think, I'm kind of on my way out of Berlin, and one of the reasons is that there's been a dissolve of a social landscape there and a creative landscape there in terms of, yeah, I think there's just been like people are not, yeah, there's also I guess just a yeah, in my own life there's like this need or this desire for thinking about these very human physical things that are going to impact the next decades of my life. And
Hmm.
I also just think about s- yeah, physical space. Like one of my goals is to create buildings, hopefully multiple places, like venues, studios, places where people can come not just for sanctuary, but for like to make performance, to make their work. And um that a part of doing that is also this accruing. Yeah, I think about this in terms of again, like the people who are often on a different side than I am in terms of talking about technology and politics as it relates to our health. Those people have never been involved in manual labor. They've never done
Right.
manual labor. And I
Right.
sound like such a like you don't know what it's the value of hard work. But I'm like there is something that you learn from the physical experience
It's true.
of
Yeah.
creating creating a roof deck or sorry like a not a roof like a yeah doing any sort of like building of something physical, replacing fence posts,
Hmm.
having to spread bark or mulch so that the soil works so that you're able to grow food. There's so much that's like such a vital world of information that where we've kind of been so disconnected from beyond sort of, and people always think, oh, that's only for farmers or that's only for people who are like, but I'm like, no, there is no inside outside with who can be learning these things and doing these things.
Hmm.
And I think a big part of it also has to do with how much we devalue and hide labor
Hmm.
politics
Hmm.
and our practices of like
Yeah.
where things get made, how things get made. Anyways, yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I know. We still have bodies. Like, our conscious, we have it.
That
I
soon.
don't think so either. I think
I'm
we're,
sure most of us are, as much as we'd like to, some people would like to make us believe, we have our bodies.
yeah, exactly. And consciousness still takes place in a body. It's sort of like, yeah, I mean, it's wild. And I mean, maybe this is like a good transition to something I wanted to ask you about. And I feel like you're already kind of going down this road, but what are some of the things that you feel optimistic about now? Like, what are you seeing as like really positive, paths forward, for yourself and culture, etc.
Sort of what I realized people go to Colin Self for that. They're like, Colin, like, make us feel better. Like, they're like, what is, like, is every, like, help me understand that, like, I'm not doomed and everything. Like, me and my friend Monica use this term doomslayer, which just feels like very much what, like, Monica and my MO is based in, is just this idea that, like, you know, we live inside of manufactured Zoom, manufactured Zoom. Zoom Doom. But yeah, that it sort of is like it's the things that I'm really excited about, 3 years ago, Monica and I started a performance school that takes place in Lincolnville, Maine currently, um, which is one incredible thread of sort of like something that we spent 5 years building with this desire to sort of like have a performance practice or like a center of where we could bring people together to facilitate a performance community and connect people with performers all around the world. And even though it's only 3 years in, seeing the sort of effects of that as it exists beyond the sort of like short time that we get together each September, um, has been really inspiring. But yeah, for me, I think one of the main things that is inspiring to me, I think, being in this world of, or at the sort of like advent of this world of construction and building, is that our, in the media landscape and the kind of conversation of what kind of information and knowledge is passed around and shared within maybe the art and technology world, um, feels all so small when you spend your time with wood and metal and um, plants and soil and you're like taking care of land and you are figuring out how to install outlets in the ceiling and you're doing all of these things. So having a kind of physical material practice and doing all of these things that sort of and also that the doing so is like a social thing that you're like really with people. Um, it gives me so much hope and it gives me so much inspiration to see what can happen amidst like a group of people while also in this kind of physical state of working on something together. There's all these parallels for me between a performance practice where you have a shared goal with a group of people, and through communication and through a set of tools, you have to complete this task of creating this ephemeral thing. And then you have sort of a similar thing with building, but at the very end, you have a very physically tangible thing in front of you that you can say, look, we did this. And it's why so many of these, organizations exist to help habit is it called Habitat for Humanity,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
these projects where they get people to together to build physical homes or structures because you see the direct impact it has on your life and other people's life. And I think regardless of where technology goes, we have this sort of, I think for me particularly, I there's such a wealth of knowledge to be accrued in the form of spending a decade or more in my life learning about all of these building practices and then passing those things forward. But I'm also interested in it as like a person who creates music and performance. I'm
Mhm.
interested in the sort of narrative quality of being in these worlds and the sort of life that exists and the information that sort of comes from spending your days this way instead of in front of a computer. I think so many people are so brain rotted and spiritually bankrupt because they're just having everything sucked out of the life sucked out of them from a computer screen. We've all felt it.
Yeah.
Um, and I sound like one of these people who is like, the internet's the devil. And it's not that at all. But yeah, I just think about it in terms of, the last years I've been so inspired by this mentor I have, Augusto Machado, who was a part of the Playhouse of the Ridiculous and the Coquettes and the Angels of Light. And, you know, so much of, and he really was like a central figure in this sort of like playful, curious world of performance that existed, um, really on behalf of just like the people who were living and working in New York City in the 70s and 60s into the 70s. Um, and I think about in my own life the last couple years, a really great example of that I've experienced was that I had this big commission from the State Opera in Germany, and I made this trilogy, and I spent all of this time and energy making this really big production. And I had a pretty bad experience working with the bureaucracy of the German state. And then immediately after, I made a play with you know, four other cast members and some puppets that I had built. And we performed at the New Theater Hollywood and sold out all these shows. And all of a sudden I was like, okay, so here's a much smaller community of people gathering together, having a much more meaningful experience, telling stories that really like are received for and received by people who understand and have a context for why we're here in this room together. And it was a big wake up call for me about what once was my desire to my imagination was that like the bigger you get in scale, the more successful you are, or the better your art is. And so much of the last few years have has helped me understand that logic of bigger is better is just in terms of like art making is just not the case.
Yeah.
And that so often the most beautiful and meaningful works, this is also the world of puppetry, is just like the best shows that you're gonna see are gonna have an audience of 20 people or 50 people. And so I'm thinking about that as, you know, we move through time in this like very strange paradigm where we're kind of moving away from a certain type of dreaming or a certain type of fantasy about what technology was going to be generationally, that there is so much meaningfulness and there's so much value in these local communities. And then also, yeah, it's also maybe a privilege that I have that I grew up in these little in underground scenes and I got to bear witness to what was possible. And so it feels like bringing that back to the center and letting people know that it still exists,
Yeah.
just because it's not the dominant narrative doesn't mean that it isn't happening.
Do you feel like there's a resurgence of that localized, independent, I guess what used to be called sort of independent, more community based art practice? Is that something that you're seeing more of?
And I spend a lot of time in all these different places as my job. Like my main job for the last decade has been touring, and there has been a really crazy uptick. Like for the music or for the record that I put out in February, I've been touring a live show where I work with a local community in each city. And sometimes those people are a pre-existing ensemble, and sometimes they are just, they make a call for performers and people show up. And luckily, because of what I do, it tends to be like some pretty freaky, amazing weirdos who just like are down to learn like some music and choreography. But um, being one of the reasons why I wanted to do this with a tour is I also wanted to understand the social and creative uh, dynamics of all these different places that I'm performing to. And then in doing so, have found that a lot of these people are like, oh yeah, I have a space. That's in my like backyard or my friend's studio, and we have a group singing project, or we have this performance group, and we make drag shows here on at this one thing on Wednesday. It's like connecting and being with people in my performance practice as the sort of like arranger of elements in these temporary assemblies helps put me in touch with all of these different groups of people in Los Angeles, New York, and Gijón, then The Hague, like, anywhere you go in the world, you're like, oh, there's people doing this. Like, so you're like, we're really not alone in our desire and action towards creating alternative systems.
Yeah.
But a lot of these people are also like, they don't have social media accounts. They're not interested in, especially this like younger generation, these people in their 20s, they're like, would never have Instagram, like,
Yeah.
fuck the psychic warfare of social media. They're like, I make all of my art. They're like, you can contact me on Signal, but I don't, or like I don't even have a smartphone. Like, you know, there's a ton of people doing those things, and it does feel like I don't know if it's an uptick, but it's definitely like my conscious my conscious awareness of those people because I'm around them all the time.
hmm I mean, I that's really great to hear for so many reasons, and I feel like it aligns, with observations that I've had in the last few years in particular. So I'm really glad to hear that you're seeing that. And what well, you're working on so many things. I think you have a few projects that are sort of coming to fruition in the next months, if I'm not mistaken, or even in the next weeks. Could you talk a little bit about maybe where your practice is kind of reaching some points of some cadence points that people might be able to interact with or engage with?
So I had a music record come out in February, and I've been spending most of this year um, promoting and touring that a live show called Gasp, which is very much about sort of this conversation between the world of the living and the non-living, and essentially turning stages into these temporary shrines where we can create a ceremony for that dialogue in a way that's both like playful and reverent at the same time. So, um, yeah, there's more shows of that coming up in the fall. I'll do a little bit more touring in Europe. I also started this performance school with my friend Monica, and we are in our third year. That will be taking place in in Maine at the beginning of September. And then what else is happening? Um, yeah, I teach part-time in Berlin, and then I'll be guest teaching at a school in Louisville, Kentucky, um, creating like a public-facing performance with the students at KiCad. And what else am I doing? Whenever I explain my like 6 months of my life to people and like where I'm going and what I'm doing, uh, it always sounds like a little bit of like a comedy monologue because I go to so many different places and I do so many different things. But yeah, the last year has also been, I had a couple different um, exhibitions with like puppets or with, things that were performance related. But on the horizon, what else could I say? I'm trying to think of other places that I'll be where people could come and see. I mean, I'm hosting a choir session and doing a performance in Seattle next week, but I think this is too soon for by the time the
Yeah.
podcast is created. And but yeah, I'll be performing in Prague and then in Ljubljana for Indigo Festival in October. And then what else? I have a couple records coming out. I have the reissue of an album called Elation that I released in 2015 will be
Great.
coming out later this year as the 10-year anniversary. I just recorded a record with a men's choir, or with, I should say, testosteronized voices. I think only half of the people in the album actually are identify as men, but yeah, I have a choral record that will come out next spring via this label called Pool Music, and then we will be creating and touring a live a cappella choral show. I might be touring to Australia in February, knock on wood that it actually happens. And then, yeah, otherwise, you can't really have an audience for a building project as much as I want to invite people to in March to come and watch me help build a house. Uh,
I don't know. You might give it a shot. I mean, you might be surprised.
out these construction sites and performance and what it would be to make performances that are sort of happening at scale of you know construction projects. So like a performance that happens gradually over the course and intervals over like 2.5 months, and people come to a site where things are happening and people are making music and singing and talking about building. Like
Hmm.
that's something further down the line. We'll see when I get there.
Well, that's astounding, and I'm not surprised in the least that you are undertaking scores of immensely interesting projects at the same time. But the in all seriousness, I mean, I think what I have always enjoyed about your work is it kind of, I don't know, it's, I don't, not many artists I feel like have this talent, but I certainly feel that you do, of just essentially bringing a very original voice and a very clear voice to like everything you do, whether it's building a house or doing a performance. There's always an element of, to me, just, there's such an element of continuity to everything you do that it almost feels like the genre or the media or the material almost becomes secondary. And I just appreciate, getting to follow that. And it's just a, yeah.
Myself is, there's in my mind, I'm like, yeah, there's always that thing where I'm like, I have this crazy life and it must be very bewildering to others. So whenever I hear these messages of affirmation, I appreciate it because it's like, all right, it does. People can see. I'm like, do people see what I see? Is there like, is it? Yeah.
Well, but I think that's what really, I think that's what people who bring themselves to their art in such a kind of clear and earnest manner as you do. I think it makes that continuity seem very present. And, some people do just live a crazy life, but that's a different thing. So,
Think about it, and I think about it all the time of like I have this very like jigsaw way of having an art practice between like being a facilitator, making music
mm-hmm,
and performance and puppetry, and it works. Like I'm over a decade in
mm-hmm,
to my job is my art, which I feel so incredibly privileged to get to do that with my life. But there's this process of transcribing it, externalizing it, and putting it in front of me where I can explain how that works to someone. And I do feel like sometimes when I'm explaining it, I'm like, I'm like, bear with me. I was like, it's gonna make sense. You just got to try it. So, yeah, there's always this sort of, I don't know. I ask myself all the time, like, what is it about? What does it take to get people to have the capacity to imagine building new systems or being an artist in a way that maybe hasn't existed in the past
mm-hmm.
and to feel a sense of meaningfulness and purpose and to also feel supported in their
Yeah.
work. And I want to create the infrastructure in my lifetime to help facilitate that when I'm physically not here. So, that's like a long-term thing with all of this building and performance and whatnot. But I have many decades of work ahead of me before I get
Mm-hmm.
there.
I think that's the perfect place to hit pause on the conversation in hopes that we can pick it up down the road and hear where everything is at and everything that you're doing. It's just a pleasure to catch up. So thank you for taking the time, and it's good to hear about everything that you're doing. And yeah. Oh, I told you I'm not a professional podcaster. Where's a good place for people to find out more? Yeah.
I'm just Colin Self on Instagram and all of the other places. It's just my name. It's not a made up name. It's my real last name. People always ask me like, why did you choose Self as an artist name? I'm like, I'm not that narcissistic, but um, yeah. So I'm Colin Self on Instagram. My website is just colin-self.com, and I have a Substack. That's like my main place. I try to get people to
Oh, great.
follow what I do, and you can become a paid subscriber, and that also is a whole different thing of providing resources and whatnot. And that is just my name,
Cool.
colinself.substack.com.
Awesome.
And thank you so much, Roddy. It's so nice to also catch up with you. And I'm like, now I want to do an hour. I get to interview you for my Substack. And I was like, I should start my own podcast just so I can talk to you about your life and practice.
Oh man, I thank you for saying that. Honestly, that's the whole reason I started this kind of podcasting thing, was just kind of, I just like people like you I want to talk to. So I'm just like, it's a perfect kind of container for it, and then hopefully it leads to more, you know. And but I yeah, thank you for saying that. And yeah, I feel like I'm just at the beginning of this journey, so we'll see where it all goes. So, what stays with me after talking with Colin is the clarity of his proposition. The care is not abstract, it's literally the room we build together, the breath we share. If you'd like to learn more, check out my services at ultradilute.com. I'd love to speak and answer any questions you may have about homeopathy, and I appreciate you listening today.